Before I tell you what happened between Elias Callum and the woman they brought to his door on a Tuesday in October, I want you to understand something about mountain men that most people get wrong. They aren't quiet because they have nothing to say. They're quiet because somewhere along the way, they learned that speaking too soon costs more than silence. Elias hadn't asked for a wife. He'd asked his cousin Darnell to stop worrying. Darnell, who had a gift for turning other people's loneliness into his own project, had written a letter to a settlement family 3 ridges over. A family with a daughter named Sable Running Water, half Apache, half Irish, who had agreed to the arrangement not out of desperation, but out of something I still don't fully understand, even now, having watched the whole thing unfold from my position as Elias' nearest neighbor, and apparently his unofficial record keeper. What I can tell you is this. The morning she arrived, Elias stood on his porch with his hat in both hands, turning it in slow circles the way he always did when he was trying not to say the wrong thing. And she stepped down from that wagon and looked at the mountain behind his cabin, not at him, and said, quietly, to no one in particular, "I've lived inside walls that didn't belong to me before. I know how to wait." Elias stopped turning his hat. What came after that, the weeks of careful silence, the slow unraveling of 2 people who had both survived things they hadn't told anyone, that's what this story is about. Not love, not yet. Something harder and more honest than love. Trust. I keep a ledger. Not for money, Lord knows there's rarely enough of that out here to warrant the paperwork, but for days, events, the things I see that I know I'll want to remember the way they actually happened, not the way memory smooths them over into something easier to carry. October 4th, clear sky, wind from the north smelling like pine resin and coming cold. Elias Callum's arranged bride arrived at 9:30 in the morning on a wagon driven by her older brother, a tall man named Cale who had her same dark eyes and her same habit of measuring everything twice before he spoke. I was mending fence line on the eastern edge of my property, which happens to run parallel to the road that leads to Elias' land, so I had a clear view without meaning to. I'm not a man who pries, but some things position themselves in your line of sight whether you invite them or not. The wagon stopped. Cale climbed down first and walked around to offer his hand. She didn't take it, not out of rudeness it seemed, but out of habit. She climbed down herself, both feet finding the ground with the careful deliberateness of someone who has learned not to assume the earth beneath her will stay steady. She was maybe 26, 27 at the outside. She wore a dark blue traveling dress that looked like it had been practical once and had been kept practical on purpose. No ornamentation, sturdy buttons, hemmed slightly above the ankle for walking. Her hair was black and braided in a single rope over her left shoulder. She carried one bag. Not a trunk, not a chest, one bag, the kind that said she either owned very little or had made very deliberate choices about what she'd bring. Elias was on the porch. He'd been there since before the wagon crested the ridge, which told me he'd been watching the road since early morning and had positioned himself exactly where he needed to be by the time she arrived. He's not a spontaneous man, Elias. He plans his spontaneity, which sounds like a contradiction until you've lived next to him for 11 years. He's 34, built like the mountain he lives against, wide through the shoulders, deliberate in every movement, the kind of man who moves heavy things without appearing to hurry. He has a beard he keeps trimmed but not styled, and he wears the same expression in all weather, watchful, contained, like a door that's latched but not locked. I watched him come down off the porch steps when she approached. He stopped 2 feet short of her, exactly 2 feet, I noted, and held out his hand. She looked at it. Not suspiciously, not coldly, more like she was reading it, like a hand extended in greeting was a sentence she wanted to understand before she responded to it. Then she shook it, once firm. "Sable Running Water," she said. "Elias Callum," he said, "I appreciate you making the trip." Which was, I reflected, possibly the most Elias thing Elias had ever said. 17 words that were technically warm and practically had all the temperature of a well-water bucket. Her brother stood slightly to her left and behind, doing the particular thing that older brothers do when they're trying not to look like they're assessing whether the man is worth leaving their sister with. He wasn't very good at pretending not to assess, but to Elia's credit, he seemed to understand the evaluation was happening and didn't bristle at it. "I'll take your bag," Elias said to her. "I have it," she said. Not sharp, just "I have it," he didn't press. They went inside. Cale waited by the wagon. I finished my fence mending, and because I am a man who minds his business, I immediately walked over to introduce myself. "Morning," I said. "I'm Wade Prout. I run the property east of here." Cale nodded and looked at the cabin. "She all right in there?" "Elias is a decent man," I said. "Quiet, fair. Never known him to be unkind." "Quiet and kind aren't the same thing." "No," I agreed. "They're not, but in his case they coexist reasonably well." Cale was quiet for a moment. The wind picked up, and the aspens along the road edge caught it and turned silver. "She agreed to this," he said finally, like he needed me to know it, like he'd been carrying the weight of that fact since the day she agreed. "I understand," I said. He stopped, started again differently. "She doesn't trust easily. She didn't used to be that way. She used to be louder. Younger, I mean. She used to fill rooms up. Something happened that made her smaller. Not smaller, but—" He couldn't find the word. I recognized that. There's a kind of diminishment that isn't weakness, that isn't brokenness, that doesn't have a word in any language I know. The kind that happens when someone has been told repeatedly that the space they naturally occupy is too much, and they've believed it long enough that believing it became the shape of them. "She'll be all right," I said, because what else do you say to a brother leaving his sister with a stranger in a mountain cabin in October? He stayed another hour. She came back to the door once to say something to him. I couldn't hear it, and he nodded, and she went back inside. When he finally drove away, he did it without looking back, which I suspected cost him considerably. I didn't see them again until that evening. I'd brought over a pot of elk stew. I'd made too much legitimately, though I'll admit the timing was convenient, and knocked at the door around supper time. Elias answered. He didn't look tense exactly. He looked like a man who was concentrating very hard on being relaxed. "Wade," he said. "Too much stew," I said, and held up the pot. He stepped back and let me in. The cabin was warm. He'd had the fire going since morning. I could tell by the way the heat had settled deep into the walls, and it was clean in the way that says someone cleaned it specifically, and recently, not the daily managed tidiness of a bachelor, but the special occasion kind. He'd put things on the table. A cloth. 2 chairs arranged properly opposite each other rather than the usual single chair, and the standing over-the-counter arrangement he normally operated under. Sable was sitting at that table with a cup of something, tea, maybe, or just hot water, held in both hands, and she was looking at a page in a small book she'd closed when I came in. Not hiding it, just finished with it or pausing. "This is my neighbor Wade," Elias said. "He's brought stew." "I heard," she said. There was something in her voice I couldn't quite pin. Not amusement exactly, but adjacent to it. "It smells like juniper." "I may have added too many berries," I said. "I like juniper," she said. She didn't smile when she said it, but the sentence had the shape of something that might have been a smile, in a different set of circumstances, in a person who was currently further along in feeling safe than she was. I put the stew down, and Elias found bowls. He had to check 2 different shelves, which told me he'd reorganized in anticipation of having a second person in the house, and hadn't fully memorized his own new system yet, and we all sat down to eat. They were quiet together, but it wasn't the bad kind of quiet, not the kind full of things being pointedly not said. It was more like two people who had both decided, independently, that speaking too soon was worse than waiting. I'm not a man who can tolerate that kind of quiet for long. I keep a ledger partly because it gives me somewhere to put things when I can't say them out loud. "How was the ride in?" I asked her. "Long," she said. "Cold afternoon." "Where were you before?" She looked at me with those careful eyes. "A settlement south of Ridgecrest. My mother's family held land there." Held past tense, I didn't follow it. "You do well in cold weather?" I asked. "I do well in most weather," she said. Then, "I prefer wind to stillness. Stillness makes me feel like something's about to happen." Elias, who had been eating in his methodical and quiet way, looked up at that. "Wind comes off the peak most mornings," he said. "By 8 o'clock it's usually moving." It was the most specific and personal thing I'd heard him offer in years. She looked at him not long, 2 seconds at the most, then back to her bowl. "Good," she said. I left them the rest of the stew and walked home under a sky that was putting on a considerable show, stars hammered in tight, and the Milky Way running like chalk dust across the black. I stood outside my own door for a minute longer than I needed to. There's a particular kind of watching you do when two people are in the early stages of learning each other. It's not voyeurism. It's more like witnessing, like standing in the back of a room where something important might happen and not wanting to be the thing that disturbs it. I noted in my ledger when I got inside, October 4th, she arrived. No incident, they ate supper together. He told her about the wind. That last part I underlined, though I'm not sure I could have explained why. The second day, I didn't go over. I had genuine work, a section of the north pasture fence that had buckled under a fallen tree. And besides, there's a version of being neighborly that crosses into hovering, and I had no desire to be that. But I could see the cabin from the high ground on my property, and I confess I looked. Elias was splitting wood in the morning. That was normal. He splits wood most mornings. What wasn't normal was that she was there, standing off to the side with her arms crossed, not against the cold, but in the way of someone watching something and thinking about it. He didn't make any attempt to explain what he was doing or invite her to watch or perform the task for her benefit. He just split wood, steadily, economically, each swing placed with the same precision he brought to everything. After a time, maybe 20 minutes, she walked into the barn. Came out 10 minutes later with a rake, and started working on the area around the fence posts he'd been meaning to clear. He didn't comment on it. She didn't offer to discuss it. They worked in parallel for the better part of an hour before going back inside. I wrote in my ledger, Oct. 5. She found something to do without being asked. He noticed but didn't make a thing of it. Then I added, this might actually work. On the third morning I went over for a proper reason. I needed to borrow Elias' post-hole digger, which was a real tool I actually needed and not a fabricated excuse, although I'll admit the errand could have waited another day. She was on the porch when I walked up, sitting on the top step with that small book again, except this time she was writing in it, not reading. She heard me coming up the path and looked up without alarm, which interested me. Some people startle easily and some don't, and the ones who don't either have very secure natures or have learned, through some harder process, to absorb surprise as a matter of course. "Morning," I said. "Good morning, Mr. Prout," she said. "Wade's fine." She considered this for a beat. "Wade," she agreed. "Elias inside." Checking the cellar, the root vegetables needed, she paused, and I got the sense she was being precise, not uncertain. "Rotating," he said. "He rotates things." "I've noticed," she said. And there it was again, that sentence carrying the ghost of something that wasn't quite a smile, but was in the same family. I sat down on the step below hers, because it seemed like the kind of morning that called for it, and because I'm an old man with creaky knees who is not above finding legitimate reasons to rest them. "This is a good mountain," I said. "I can tell," she said. "It talks." I turned to look at her. She was looking at the peak above the tree line. The morning wind was already moving down the slope, hissing through the ponderosas, making them lean and recover in long, slow waves. "My grandfather said mountains that talk have spirit in them," she said. "He was Apache, my mother's father." She said it without any particular emphasis, not defiant, not apologetic, just factual. "This is who I come from. This is part of what I am." He said most mountains are asleep, but some of them are paying attention. I thought about that. "What does a talking mountain say?" I asked. She was quiet for a moment. The wind came down harder and moved her braid. "Not words," she said, "just that it knows you're there, that you're not invisible on it." There was something in the way she said that. The word invisible. She'd chosen it carefully, the way people choose words that have weight because they've earned that weight personally. "Has there been a lot of that?" I asked. "Being invisible?" She looked at me steadily. She had a quality of stillness that wasn't emptiness. It was more like deep water, still on the surface, considerable beneath. "Enough," she said. I didn't push it. The cellar door creaked open, and Elias came up from underground, brushing cellar dirt from his hands, and the moment closed itself off cleanly, the way those moments do. He saw us on the steps and stopped. "Post hole digger," I said, "if you're not using it." "Back of the barn," he said, but he didn't move to get it. He was looking at us, at her mainly, though I don't think he knew he was doing it. "I was telling Wade about my grandfather," she said to Elias, not explaining herself, just including him, giving him the information without making it a big occasion. "The Apache one," Elias said. She looked at him with an expression I couldn't fully read. Slight surprise, maybe, or the recalibration of an assumption. "You read Cale's letter," she said. "Twice," Elias said. Wanted to know what I was. A pause. He cleared his throat. Who I was asking to come here. It was, by a significant margin, the most revealing thing I had ever heard Elias Callum say. And I've known the man 11 years. She looked at him for a moment that lasted just long enough to be significant. "He mentioned my grandfather. He mentioned you were proud of both sides of your family, that it mattered to him that whoever you came to would understand that." Another pause. I thought that was a fair thing to say. She was quiet. The wind came off the mountain and moved through all three of us and kept going. "My grandfather's name was Runswith Stone," she said finally. "He lived until I was 14. He taught me how to read weather by the way birds position themselves before a storm. A beat. He also taught me to be careful with people who speak easily and mean it poorly." She was looking at Elias when she said it. He held her gaze without flinching. "That seems like sound advice." "Yes," she said, "it does." I got the post hole digger and left them there, and I walked back to my property with the particular feeling of a man who has witnessed the very earliest movement of something that doesn't yet know what it is. That evening I wrote in my ledger. October 6. She told him about her grandfather. He told her he'd read her brother's letter twice. Neither of them called it what it was, but they both knew. Trust doesn't start with one big moment. I've always known that. It starts with a series of very small ones. The word chosen carefully, the hand not taken and the hand not withdrawn anyway, the silence that holds rather than withholds. Elias wants something I'm not sure he knows how to ask for, and she is trying to determine whether the asking is genuine. I don't know how it ends. I don't know if the mountain keeps talking long enough for them to figure it out. But she's still there, and he's still being careful. For now, I suppose that's where it starts. It was the middle of the second week when Elias came to my door in the early evening with a problem. He knocked twice, his knock, which has a specific rhythm, too close together and then waiting, like a sentence with a pause in it. I opened the door and he was standing there with his hat in one hand and a look on his face I recognized as his version of troubled. On most men, troubled looks like furrowed brows and shifting weight and words coming in clusters. On Elias it looks like a man standing extremely still in the wrong place. "She won't eat supper," he said. I waited. I don't know if it's the food or something I did or something I didn't do. I don't know how to ask without it sounding like an accusation. I put my jacket on. Did she say she wasn't hungry? She said she was fine. I said. He gave me a look. What does mean? It means I'll come over. She doesn't need fixing, he said, immediately and with a firmness that surprised me, like he'd thought about it enough to be clear on that. She's not a problem to solve. He stopped, turned his hat. I don't know what to offer. I thought about that on the walk over. What Elias had just said was more perceptive than most men manage on the subject. She's not a problem to solve. Most men, confronted with a quiet woman who won't eat, default to action: more food, different food, a question asked like a probe. They're trying to fix the gap between expected and actual because the gap makes them anxious. Elias had named the instinct and rejected it before he'd acted on it. That wasn't nothing. She was sitting on the porch when we got there. Not in her usual way, the book, the deliberate stillness. She was just sitting, looking at the far ridge, and even from a distance something about the set of her shoulders said the day had been heavy. I sat down next to her without being invited, which is the right move in those situations, and also a benefit of being old enough that it seems less presumptuous. "Bad day," I said. "I got a letter," she said. I waited. "From the settlement, one of my mother's cousins," she said, a pause that had effort in it. She said the land dispute was settled. The way they settled it was that the family lost. Another pause. 40 years of that land. My mother buried 2 children there. My grandfather is buried there. She stopped. I looked at the ridge. Elias had come up behind us and stopped on the second step, and I didn't look back at him because I thought the right thing in that moment was for her not to feel observed too closely. "I'm sorry," I said. "That's a real loss." "Everyone keeps saying it's just land," she said, and there was something in her voice then, not anger exactly, but the shape of something that had been anger long enough to become exhaustion. People who say that have never had land be the proof that they existed, that they mattered, that they were real. I had no answer for that. It was one of those true things that doesn't benefit from a response. She was quiet for a time. Then from behind us, Elias spoke. "My father lost the eastern claim on this property," he said, "when I was 9. Court said the survey was faulty, but the truth was the money was against us." A pause. "He died on land a third of what he'd planned to leave me, but he's buried at the corner of the north pasture where the oak grows, and when I built the fence line, I built it around the tree." She turned to look at him. He was looking at the oak, which you could see from here, a big old tree at the north edge, standing outside the fence line like it had been given a border of its own. "I built the fence around it," he said again, quieter, like saying it once hadn't been quite enough. She was still looking at him. "It's not the same thing," he said. "I know that. I'm not saying it's the same." "No," she said. "But you're not saying it's just land either." He looked at her then, and the look had something unguarded in it that I only caught because I was paying the particular attention of a man with a ledger. "No," he said, "I know what land carries." She turned back to the ridge and I watched something shift in her, not resolution, not relief, but a small degree of loosening. The kind that happens when someone says the right thing not by fixing anything, but by refusing to minimize it. Elias sat down on the other side of the step. The 3 of us sat and watched the last of the light leave the ridge. Eventually, she went inside and made tea and brought it out in 3 cups without asking, which was the first time she'd made something for the household, and Elias took his cup with both hands the way you take something you're being careful with. I walked home later with the specific feeling of a man who has witnessed something he doesn't have quite the right word for. I wrote in the ledger, Oct. 15. Land dispute settled against her family. She grieved it. He didn't try to fix it. He just put it alongside his own. That's harder than it sounds. The thing about trust, the real kind, not the easy kind that comes with charm and easy mornings, is that it builds in moments of being correctly not helped. Most people want to help when someone is hurting. And mostly what help looks like in those moments is filling the silence, offering solutions, redirecting towards silver linings. What Elias did instead, that evening on the porch, was hold still and let her pain take up its full space. Not because he was passive, Elias is not a passive man, but because he'd made a decision, and the decision was, she knows what she needs better than I do, and what she needs right now is not to be managed. I've been watching people my entire life. I've kept the ledger because I think human beings do important things so quietly that no one documents them, and then everyone wonders later why certain people work out and others don't. The unrecorded small moments are the whole story. The big declared ones are just the ceremony. There was an incident in the third week that I'll put down straight. A man named Creighton Jarvis came through. He has a parcel of timber land another 5 miles up the road, and he stops at Elias now and then to grouse about the county assessor and drink coffee and feel less isolated. He's not a bad man. He's a man with a limited idea of the world who has never had significant cause to expand it. I was there when he arrived, helping Elias repair the barn loft. There had been a week of early snow that found a weakness in the roofline. Jarvis came up on his horse, saw Sable working in the kitchen garden. She'd been preparing it for winter mulching, systematic and precise in the way she did most physical tasks. And he pulled up and stared in that particular way that men like Jarvis have of staring that isn't malicious, exactly, but is comprehensively ignorant. "Who's that?" he said. "My wife," Elias said. He said it the way he said everything, level, no decoration. But there was something in the brevity of it that closed a door. Jarvis watched her for another moment. Half Apache, someone was saying. "My wife," Elias said again. I watched Jarvis recalibrate. He'd been expecting elaboration and he wasn't going to get any, and the absence of it was its own statement. "Right," Jarvis said. He dismounted, let it go. She had heard from the garden, I knew, because her movements had paused for one brief beat and then resumed, exactly as before. Not fleeing, not confronting, just absorbing and continuing, the way she did things. Later, when Jarvis was gone and the loft repair was done and Elias had come back in from the barn, I was in the kitchen with her, and she was making corn bread, and I was sitting at the table being superfluous. "He does that," I said, "says the same thing twice." She was measuring corn meal. I noticed. "He didn't come up with anything else," I said. "No," she agreed. "He didn't." A pause. That was the second time in my life I've heard someone cut off that kind of conversation by just not continuing it. She didn't say who the first was. "What happened the first time?" I asked anyway. She was quiet for a moment. Her hands moved with the steady efficiency of someone who finds cooking more honest than most forms of conversation. "My mother," she said, "when I was 12, a woman at the trading post said something about her being the wrong kind of person to be buying fabric for good dresses." A pause. "My mother paid for the fabric, thanked the woman for her opinion, and we left." Another pause. I asked her later how she didn't say anything. She said that some people are so certain of themselves that arguing gives them proof that they're worth arguing with. She said she preferred to give them nothing. I looked at the corn bread batter. "Your mother sounds like a woman of considerable character," I said. "She was," Sable said. "She died 4 years ago." I didn't offer anything to that, just let it sit. She put the pan in the oven and turned around and looked at me with a clear, level gaze. "He's careful," she said. I didn't ask who. "He doesn't," she considered. He doesn't make me feel like I have to explain what I am before he decides what to think of me. No, I said, he doesn't. I've had to do that a lot, she said, not bitterly, just accurately. Stand in front of people and answer the unasked question about which half of me they're talking to. I thought about that. You shouldn't have to do it here, I said. She nodded once, not gratefully, more like she was filing it, checking it against what she'd observed and finding it consistent. I know, she said, which I realized was a different thing than believing it yet. I'll tell you the other thing that happened in week 3, because it matters. Elias keeps a small shelf of books. He's a reader, unexpected in a man who mostly communicates in single declarative sentences, but that's been true of him as long as I've known him. He keeps them by category: natural history, weather patterns, one battered surveying manual he's never explained, and a set of half-remembered poetry that had been his mother's. On the 17th day, I came over in the afternoon to return a drawknife I'd borrowed, and I found them in the main room. She was on the chair with her book and he was on the other chair with his, and there was a fire going and neither of them was talking. But here is the thing. When I knocked and Elias looked up and then she looked up, there was a moment between those two looks. A half-second where neither of them was looking at me yet, and in that half-second they were just two people in the same room with books and a fire, and the room didn't have the feeling of a provisional arrangement or a polite cohabitation. It had the feeling of somewhere that two people lived. I stayed long enough to return the drawknife and have coffee. Before I left, she showed me something from her book, a pressed flower, dry and dark with age, tucked between 2 pages. My grandfather collected plants, she said. I've been pressing them since I was 7, a record of every place I've lived. She looked at it for a moment. I found something yesterday in the South Meadow, she said. Something I haven't seen before. I don't know what it is. She looked at Elias. He leaned over and looked at the empty page where the new pressing would go, a blank space beside the old, archived ones. I could take you up to the high meadow next week, he said. There's more variety up there. She looked at the blank page. Okay, she said. I wrote in the ledger when I got home, Oct. 21, she's pressing plants. He offered to show her where there are more. She said okay. Then I added, she's starting to map this place. When a person starts making a record of somewhere, that's when they're deciding it might be theirs. Then I crossed out the last sentence and wrote it again, or deciding they might be willing to let it be. I'm still not sure which one I meant. First real snow arrived on the 2nd day of the month, not the flirting kind that October does, testing the ground, seeing what holds, but the committed kind, the kind that says, we are here now and the rest of the year belongs to us. 8 inches by nightfall. The peaks above the tree line disappeared and the sky came down to sit on the ridge like a hat pulled low. I've been through 40-some winters on this mountain, and I still feel the first real snow the way I felt the first one as a boy, like the world has finally gotten serious about something. I noted it in the ledger, November 2. The snow came for real. Everything gets smaller now. I didn't see them for 3 days. Roads were bad and I had my own situation to manage, roof, livestock, the wood pile that I had underestimated. Again, despite doing this every single year of my adult life. On the 4th morning, the sky cleared and went that particular shade of cold blue that only exists in November, and I saddled up and made my way over on packed snow. Elias was stacking wood outside. She was with him. Not watching this time, working. He had the splitting maul and she was carrying splits to the stack, and the rhythm between them was so easy and established that I stopped on the road for a moment just to see it. The thing about watching 2 people work together is that it tells you everything. Work strips down the performance of relationship and leaves the actual architecture visible. You can see who waits for who. You can see who adjusts without being asked. You can see whether the space between them is empty or full. The space between them was full. She saw me first and raised a hand. I came up the path and Elias looked over and the usual economy of his greeting was there, but behind it was something that I had been watching grow for 6 weeks without quite naming until now. He was lighter. Not cheerful. Elias will never be cheerful. It's simply not the instrument he was made from, but lighter. The particular quality of a man who has been carrying an unspecified weight and has had some portion of it redistributed without his entirely expecting it to be. "Wade," he said. "Needed to see if you were still standing," I said. "Still standing," he confirmed. "Mrs. Callum," I said to her. She gave me that near smile. "Sable is fine." "Sable," I agreed. We went inside, and she made coffee that was much better than Elias' coffee had ever been. He made it with the approach of a man solving a mechanical problem. She made it with the approach of someone who had actual opinions about it. And we sat down, and I told them about the state of my north fence under the snow, and they told me about a drift that had come up against the barn door and what they'd done about it. And it was a completely ordinary conversation of the kind that people have in kitchens in November in mountain country, and the ordinariness of it felt like something I wanted to write down. It was during that visit that the thing happened which I want to put down carefully, because I've thought about it enough that I want to get it right. Elias stepped out to bring in more wood, and she and I were alone in the kitchen, and she said without any particular preamble, "Do you know why he doesn't have any family close by?" I considered how to answer. I know things about Elias that he hasn't directly told me, things you absorb about a man over 11 years of proximity. Some of them aren't mine to give away. "His family was further east," I said carefully. "He came out here when he was about 22. I think the land called to him more than the family did." She wrapped both hands around her cup. She had a habit of doing that, anchoring herself to warmth. "He told me something," she said, "last week, about a woman before me." I waited. "He didn't love her the way she needed to be loved," Sable said. "He said those exact words. He didn't say she was wrong or that she wanted too much or that the timing was bad. He said, 'I didn't love her the way she needed to be loved, and I let it go on longer than it should have because I was afraid of being the one who ended it.'" A pause. He said it like he'd been carrying it for years and needed to put it down somewhere. I thought about that. "Why do you think he told you?" I asked. She looked into her cup. "I think," she said slowly, "he was telling me what kind of man he's trying not to be anymore." Another pause. "And what kind of man he's trying to be is a man who says true things even when they don't make him look good." I looked at the door he'd gone out through. "That's a fair read," I said. She looked at me. "I grew up reading people quickly. You have to, when people are deciding what to make of you before you've finished introducing yourself." She said it without self-pity again, just accurately. "I learned to notice what people say when there's no benefit to saying it. He doesn't get anything from telling me that story, except maybe that I know him a little better." She paused. "I think," she said, "that he wants to be known, not admired, known." I sat with that for a moment. "Most people want admiration," I said. "Yes," she said. "I know." And the way she said it told me she'd given up something in that direction, the hope that admiration and knowing could exist in the same person at the same time. The door opened and Elias came back in with an armload of wood, stamping snow off his boots, and she turned back to her coffee, and I turned back to mine, and the conversation folded itself away like something she'd read and didn't need to carry anymore. I'll tell you what I saw 2 weeks later, because it's important and I'm trying to be honest in this account. There was an evening in late November, cold enough that breathing outside left a cloud, when I happened to be riding back late from the southern pasture, and I passed close enough to Elias' cabin to see the light in the window. Just a lamp, nothing remarkable. But they were both at the table and they were both looking at the same thing, something between them on the table, a paper or a map or her plant-pressing book. I couldn't tell from the road, and the lamp threw a shape of warm light out against the snow, and they were inside it. There's a word in that image that I haven't got. Not contentment, too settled. Not happiness, too light. Something more considered than either. Two people who have arrived at a version of the same place by roads that were difficult and different and have looked up and found themselves, unexpectedly, in the same kitchen with the same lamp. I didn't slow down. It wasn't my moment to witness. The conversation that I consider the hinge of this whole account, the one I have returned to more than any other, happened on a Sunday morning in early December. I had come over because Elias had mentioned a section of fence on the south boundary that we shared responsibility for, and we needed to agree on a plan for spring. It was a practical, entirely unromantic errand. She was outside when I arrived. She had her coat on and she was standing at the edge of the yard where the ground slopes down toward the creek, and she was looking up at the peak. The mountain was out in full December clarity. No cloud. The snow on it lit up blue-white in the morning sun, the kind of view that people climb all day to see from higher up without knowing they could see it just as well from this yard if they stood in the right place. "Morning," I said. "It talked this morning," she said. I came and stood next to her and looked up. "What did it say?" She was quiet for a moment. The wind came down the slope, not cold exactly, but carrying cold with it, the way a hand carries the temperature of the last thing it touched. "I'm not sure yet," she said. "I think it said I'm not invisible here." I looked up at the peak. "No," I agreed, "you're not." She was quiet for another moment. "I wrote to Cale," she said. "He asked me how I was." I told him I was," she paused, "learning the terrain." Something in the way she said that, the particular word, terrain, the kind of word you use when you've started to think of a place as something to know rather than something to endure. "He'll be glad to hear it," I said. "He'll ask what that means," she said. And there it was, the thing that had been sitting in the shape of a smile all this time. For the first time, just briefly, it became one. Small and private, directed at the mountain rather than at me, but genuinely there. Elias came out a few minutes later. He looked at us both and then looked up at the peak. "Clear today," he said. "She says the mountain talked," I told him. He looked at it for a moment with his serious, weathered face. Then, without any elaboration or self-consciousness, "It does that." She glanced at him. "I know," she said. "We did the fence business, and I drank coffee, and I left them to their Sunday." I walked back with the sun at my back, and the snow on the ground making everything very quiet and very clear. The particular silence of a landscape covered in snow, which isn't really silence at all but a kind of listening. I got home and I sat down, and I opened the ledger. I wrote December 7, first snow. The mountain talked, she heard it, he wasn't surprised. I looked at that for a while. Then I wrote, I don't know what trust becomes when it's given time. I've watched it being built from nothing, from a hand not taken, from a letter read twice, from the way a man doesn't say, it's just land, from a woman who plants things in a new place to see if they'll keep. Then I wrote something underneath that I've been trying to work out since October, and I think I finally have it. He said he wanted her trust before her love. I thought I understood that when he said it. I think I understand it differently now. He wasn't asking for trust as a precondition. He was asking for it as a foundation. The difference is that preconditions have to be met before anything can begin. Foundations are what you build on. The building has started. I stopped there, because there were 3 more sentences I started to write, about what might come next, about the spring when the high meadow opens up and she'll find plants she's never pressed before, about the kind of love that grows out of being correctly known, and I crossed them out. Because this story isn't about what I think will happen. It's about what I saw. And what I saw was 2 people on a mountain in December, both of them looking up.